The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Liberty. Liberty.
Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
Cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Trump calls out the squad, frames the election as capitalism versus socialism. Will he win a second term? Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com, and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. President Trump jumps into the growing civil war in the Democratic Party, with some saying it's a mistake because he should leave them alone while they're destroying themselves, while others say it will successfully define the Democrats as a party of the far left. We will analyze the ever more bitter battle over the growing radicalism of the Democratic Party and offer a fearless prediction about the 2020 presidential election. Plus, the threat posed by social media giants, Facebook, Twitter, Google, YouTube, and the rest. Are they committed to censoring conservative speech? The nation's preeminent media watchdog, Brent Bozell of the Media Research Center, will join us to sound the alarm. Plus, Talkin' Liberty with LibertyNation.com's resident constitutional lawyer, Scott Cosenza.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We commence the proceedings with our signature segment, Say What?, as we roll out an assembly line of wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. First, it was the unexpected election of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the other radical leftists in the Democratic Party in 2018. Then it was AOC and her squad of progressive young women defining a radical agenda, now given voice in the Democrats' presidential field. Then it was Democratic Party leader Nancy Pelosi, fearing the disastrous new branding of her party, slapping down the squad. Then it was AOC and company saying they were singled out by Pelosi as women of color and calling the non-progressives in their party the equivalent of 1940s segregationists. Whew. And that was all last week. This week, the 45th president, as is his wont, simply couldn't stay on the sidelines any longer. He weighed in with his own view of AOC and her progressive cohorts, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and Ayanna Pressley. First, in a tweet saying the people who hate this country can go back to where they came from, even though 3 of them were actually born in the USA, and then laid it on when he was asked about it after a speech.
If you're not happy here, then you can leave. As far as I'm concerned, if you hate our country, if you're not happy here, you can leave. That's what I said in a tweet, which I guess some people think is controversial. A lot of people love it, by the way. If you're complaining all the time, very simply, you can leave. You can leave right now. Come back if you want. Don't come back. It's okay, too.
But if you think that was provocative, listen to GOP Senator Lindsey Graham drop the C-bomb on Fox News.
We all know that AOC and this crowd are a bunch of communists. They hate Israel. They hate our own country. They're calling the guards along our border, the Border Patrol agents, concentration camp guards. They accuse people who support Israel of doing it for the Benjamins. They're anti-Semitic. They're anti-America. Don't get down. Aim higher. We don't need to know anything about them personally. Talk about their policies.
So what about their policies? Are they communists? Policies like the Green New Deal, which would certainly bankrupt the country, or Medicare for All, which would probably bankrupt the country. But listen to the most radical member of the squad, Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts, discuss her extreme views on identity politics.
If you are not prepared to come to that table and to represent that voice, don't come. Because we don't need any more brown faces that don't want to be a brown voice. We don't need black faces that don't want to be a black voice. We don't need Muslims that don't want to be a Muslim voice. We don't need queers that don't want to be a queer voice. And if you're worried about being marginalized and stereotyped, please don't even show up.
You are not an individual. You're a member of a group. If that's not enough to scare you, that kind of Marxist ideology in the halls of Congress, then look at how much of it is being spewed in the Democrats' presidential campaign by most all of the candidates. Now think about that kind of Marxist ideology in the White House. As Trump ramps up his efforts to deport convicted criminal aliens with raids that began several days ago, ground zero in the increasingly bitter battle of revivalists and resistors right now is on the southern border, where the Customs and Border Patrol are being overrun with asylum seekers and families are being separated as their asylum claims are being adjudicated. And it's hard to be encouraged when we witness the kind of exchanges we heard recently in congressional hearings, like when virtue-signaling leftist Congressman Chut Gonzalez of Illinois made scurrilous accusations against ICE Director Thomas Homan, who returned fire in spades.
Mr. Homan, do you understand that the consequences of separation of many children will be lifelong trauma? Do you not care? Is it because these children don't look like children that are around you?
Oh, your comments are disgusting. What I've been trying to do my 34 years serving my nation is to save lives. So for you to sit there and insult my integrity and my love for my country and for children, that's why this whole thing needs to be fixed.
And so both sides are dug in on what's become a deeply personal fight, as it has been on the presidential campaign trail. Joe Biden remains in the lead, perhaps almost by default, and this week he burnished his centrist credentials by releasing an ad emphasizing something he said in the first round of debates, that he will defend Obamacare from anyone in either party who wants to repeal it or replace it with a strictly government-run program like Medicare for All.
I believe we have to protect and build on Obamacare. That's why I proposed adding a public option to Obamacare as the best way to lower costs and cover everyone. I understand the appeal of Medicare for All, but folks supporting it should be clear that it means getting rid of Obamacare. And I'm not for that. I knew the Republicans would do everything in their power to repeal Obamacare. They still are. But I'm surprised that so many Democrats are running on getting rid of it. The Affordable Care Act was a historic achievement for President Obama. And if I'm elected president, I'm going to do everything in my power to protect it and build on it.
So, like everything else, Biden looks backward rather than forward. And he continues to appear at least a step slow on the campaign trail. Here's a compilation of 10 stumbles and bumbles from a single recent speech by the former vice president.
Donald Trump and the demagogues around the world are leaning into these forces over fascism and autocracy. We believe in free speech. That's why I'll end the gag rule, the global gag rule that prevents money. We have to be honest about, we've neglected the basics by strengthening. Folks, we're virtually energy independent. He has I don't know how to say it, and partnerships built on coercion to take on non-traditional threats like weaponized corruption. They'll reduce emissions.
Who's on first? What's on second? I don't know who's on third. Quick break, and then a fearless and logic-based prediction about the 2020 presidential election.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Where can you find honest political commentary with sobering analysis, accountability, deconstructing threats to our liberty, and boldly reporting the truth? Subscribe to LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, where facts matter.
We believe that all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
There's a funny thing about predictions. Those who make accurate ones are sure to remind you of their prescience. But those who miss the mark tend to pivot quickly and change the subject to their next prognostication. Witness the many pollsters who misfired in 2016 and have now released polling data for 2020 replete with absurdities. One poll earlier in the year, for example, had Senator Cory Booker beating Donald Trump by 5 points, for heaven's sake. But let's face it, putting oneself on the line with a weighty forecast of what's to come more than a year out is a perilous business, especially for those of us who see fit to broadcast our predictions for all to hear. But here goes. Allow me to dive right into the deep end and not to beat around the bush with hedge words like possibly or probably, but instead to state plainly an unambiguous prediction for 2020. Donald Trump will be reelected easily. This is due in part to the president himself, of course, as his approval numbers rise to their highest level since he assumed office, 47% in the latest Washington Post ABC News poll. The Trump economy is firing on all cylinders. We're enjoying a perfect storm of high growth, low unemployment, rising wages, negligible inflation, and soaring consumer and business confidence in a rising tide sweeping from Main Street to Wall Street. Through more than 2 centuries of electoral history in times of peace, the economy has always been both the single most important issue and the most reliable indicator of a president's prospects for re-election. People do not vote against their own financial interests. People do not vote against their own financial interests. It's a truism. Now, the only 3 presidents to be denied a second term in the last 100 years, Herbert Hoover, Jimmy Carter, and George H.W. Bush, were done in by deteriorating economic conditions. All the rest of the presidents, including several who were not all that popular, managed to secure a second term. But here's the catch. What if, after all the sound and fury the nation has absorbed ever since he rode down that escalator more than 4 years ago, the election of 2020 is not actually about Donald Trump? It seems incredible, but very possibly true, because the Democratic presidential field now has irreversibly committed itself to an agenda so radical that, as history also adjudges, the American people will simply disqualify the party's eventual nominee. The fates of tax-raising Walter Mondale in 1984 and the candidate of amnesty, abortion, and acid George McGovern in 1972 provide an unmistakable lesson. And keep in mind that what Mondale and McGovern supported was tame compared to the rhetoric being spewed by the overwhelming majority of current Democratic presidential candidates. But both Mondale and McGovern were trounced, losing every state but one, victims of the largest landslides in American history. Now, the current crop of Oval Office wannabes, but crucially not Democratic voters writ large, have evidently reached the self-destructive conclusion, much like the Nixon-hating left of 1972, that the way to take down Trump is not to sharpen their appeal to voters who abandoned them in 2016, but to advocate for extreme policies that draw the sharpest possible contrast with Donald Trump, with the obvious caveat that things can certainly change in the next 16 months. We could be unexpectedly drawn into war or a recession. Trump, after winning a decisive victory in 2016 with 306 votes and a 14% margin of victory in the Electoral College, can reasonably expect to expand his margin in the next election. And here's how it figures. Trump won 30 states in 2016, and none of these states seem likely to reverse course in 2020, given that Trump as president has proven to be exactly what he promised as a candidate and the person that they voted for, a furniture breaker willing to go where no man has gone before, openly challenging the legitimacy of the encrusted and entirely discredited political establishment, promoting a muscular brand of patriotism, advancing America First policies designed to kickstart a stagnant economy, and keeping the nation out of armed conflicts. Then there are 8 battleground states that Trump lost in 2016, and the president stands a better than even chance in all of the competitive states: New Hampshire, Maine, Minnesota, Nevada, Arizona, and Colorado. Trump has a realistic opportunity to sweep all 8 of those battleground states worth another 50 electoral votes. The Democrats have made their bed on the far left and now must sleep in it. It is beyond conceivable that President Trump could accumulate 350 or more electoral votes in 2020, which would amount to a mandate for his audacious agenda even greater than the one he received in 2016. When the leftists lost their collective mind after the bombastic billionaire shocked the world with his upset victory over Hillary Clinton, they convinced themselves that they could remove him from office some way or another. False claims of a Trump-Russia conspiracy, financial crimes, withering ad hominem attacks, scandal in the White House, something. But they've spent their ammunition, all of it, and it was all blanks. One can only imagine how they will react upon realizing that they must endure another 4 years of this man who represents the embodiment of everything they detest. Folks, prepare to man the barricades. We'll break away for mere moments and then come back with Brent Bozell on unprecedented media bias in the age of Trump and the existential threat to conservatives posed by the giants of technology.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel because
Truth
is making a comeback.
We believe that all men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
In an age of media bias like we've never witnessed before, 90% negative coverage of President Trump week after week, month after month, despite an economy about as healthy as we've seen in a long, long time, there exists an even greater threat than the major newspapers and TV networks. It's censorship on social media and the billions of people who participate in it. Last week, we spoke to Brent Bozell, founder and president of the vaunted Media Research Center, about the pervasiveness of media bias. This week, we continue our conversation as Mr. Bozell comes back to discuss what can be done to counter this censorship of conservative speech. But first, he rails about how the media portrayed that ugly episode in Charlottesville.
You had people on one side of the divide that were defending Southern heritage, and I'm one of them. I defend those statues. I defend that flag when it stands for heritage. Forget the racism stuff. When it stands for heritage, I defend it. You had on the other side well-meaning people who disagree with me on that. Donald Trump was absolutely correct when he said there are good people on both sides. Right. And that's what he said. And they're still pillaging him for that. If there's one thing, Tim, I wish that the administration had been tougher in its response. It should have been tougher.
I wouldn't argue with that.
Tougher in its response, standing up to the press when the press attacked them for the position.
Well, and mischaracterized what he said. He condemned white supremacists, white nationalists, neo-Nazis. He condemned them in that statement, but they plucked his good people on both sides out of it. I mean, it's such an old story now. It's been documented so many times that they were mischaracterizing what he was saying. But let me ask you this, Brent. Sure. This unprecedented media bias targeted at Donald Trump and all that he stands for and all that he says and all that he does, is this a conspiracy between the major media outlets, or is a conspiracy unnecessary since all these leftist media outlets think exactly the same way?
You know, I used to joke and say, rhetorically, is this a conspiracy? Do they get together at 8 o'clock in the morning and say, how can we get conservatives? Ha, ha, ha. No, it's not. I think it is now. I think they are on a mission. And these people do meet, and they do talk, and they do coordinate, and they do lie together, and they absolutely do share the conviction that Donald Trump needs to be removed from office. It is the right thing to do. It is the just thing to do. It is the virtuous thing to do. And therefore, yes, they have no problem at all coordinating their attacks.
Now, we do notice that digital subscriptions to these legacy publications like the New York Times and Washington Post have risen sharply since the unthinkable happened and Trump was elected. So in some sense, these media outlets that condemn Trump day after day are benefiting from his presence in the White House, are they not?
Yeah, it was CBS president, what's his name? I can't think of his name right now. One of those hashtag Me Too victims who, not a victim, he was caught.
A perpetrator.
Yeah, Perp. Perp walked out of his existence. He made that very observation. He might be a bad guy, but he's great for business. And in fact, he has been great. You ask, yourself, why does CNN have this obsession with Donald Trump? And it's because they're trying to carve out a part of the market. They know they can't compete with Fox. They know that is a news outlet that they're shot, but they're happy with a small fraction of the American population that is rapidly anti-Trump. Analysis for numbers. We looked at these numbers, and this was about a month ago. We looked at the audience for CNN. It was 761,000 people. And that in a nation of 335 million, if you're doing the math, is approximately 0.2% of America. that CNN, the network of record, is now reaching. To put that number in its proper perspective, there are more people in America who own pet chickens than watch CNN.
I see you put your researchers to work again, Brent.
Yeah. There are more prostitutes in America than there are viewers of CNN. I don't know what that means,
one I'm prepared to believe. Yeah,
I think they're both screwing you. I don't know, but I'm not going to go there.
And what about the media's credibility in the eyes of the general public, not people who obsess about politics like you and me, but just the average American that just goes about his business, just wants to be left alone and hopes the government will do a few nice things here and there. Maybe they should do more or less, whatever. But has the media actually become less credible in the eyes of the public during the Trump presidency, or more credible, or about the same?
Oh, I think that the numbers tell the story. If the public saw CNN as credible, CNN would have a credible audience. It's incredible in that sense. CNN, I think I'm asked the question: what's the future? I think CNN has no future. I don't know that they can ever restore their credibility. I don't know that anyone will ever look at CNN again and
what are we going to do?
Impartial network.
What are we going to do to pass time in the airports from now on if CNN isn't there, Brent?
Most people don't know this, that CNN actually negotiates contracts to get that.
Yep.
It is not like an airport saying, I want to have CNN.
Right.
No. Now, this is smart.
Exactly.
It's a smart branding move on their part.
Yes, it is.
That and dentist offices. They've got to do that, or they'll become complete laughingstocks. So it is a smart move on their part. But I don't think they regained their popularity. But here's to a bigger point than that. Putting aside Trump for a second, technology is having a lot of say. It's kind of like the abortion debate, where you've got it on a certain level, on a spiritual level, but it's science that's really carrying it right now. The same thing is happening in the news media. Science, technology is moving people into social media. You no longer wait until 6:30 to get the evening paper or to watch the evening news. If you want something, you whip out your smartphone and then you hit a couple buttons, and there's the information you need. If you want to know what just happened in an election, you don't wait; you see it instantly.
Right.
So we are rapidly leaving the news era and going into the information age. When that happens, then all these networks become irrelevant. But that's why there's so many. They're all going into sensationalism mode because they're all trying to capture the story of the moment, and that's why so much irresponsible reporting is coming out. Because you don't stop to get your story confirmed. As soon as somebody says a Stormy Daniels story, boom, you're out with the story. You don't bother to see that it was Avenatti who was lying again.
So, Brent, the next big challenge for conservatives is bias reflected in the social media giants, Facebook, Google, Twitter, the rest. And you're attacking that problem as well at the Media Research Center. What specifically are you doing to unmask and counter social media censorship of conservatives?
If there's one thing that I hope that conservatives will begin to understand is that social media is more important than everything you and I have just discussed. If you just look at audience numbers and it tells the story, NBC might have 4 million, but Twitter has 700 million. ABC might have 4.5 million. Facebook has 2.2 billion. They are the information sources of the future. They're not nationwide. They are worldwide. Now, if they were just impartial platforms on which you placed your information, that'd be one thing, but they're not. Every single day, another conservative is being deplatformed. He's being banned. He's being suspended, or she. Demonetized is another one that they're doing, making it impossible to do business. Just ask Dennis Prager on their sites, all for espousing crazy things, such as, and people don't believe me, on Twitter, a liberal professor in Canada said, and now hold on, she said, quote, "A woman is not a man," unquote, and was banned from Twitter because the gay owner refuses to allow anyone to make any kind of judgment on sexuality of a person. So she was banned. This is how radicalized it's become. Facebook, Twitter is doing this, YouTube, Google. So then the question becomes, well, what do you do about it? What can you do about it? What can you do about Facebook that has the ability to swallow anything in its path? What do you do to compete with Apple that has $1 trillion in the bank? What do you do to compete with Google that controls 92% of search engines in the world? You can't compete with them. They are, Gene Kirkpatrick, the late great Gene Kirkpatrick, used to talk about forces that were outside of the system of checks and balances, as the founders had seen them. Social media is outside the system of checks and balances.
Right.
They are as powerful, and remember this, they're worldwide. So when they set the rules, they're setting the rules for the entire world. If you don't do what we say, you cannot be heard. You cannot be heard. Doreen Borelli, who on the Blaze yesterday was banned from Facebook. You can't be heard. James Woods, if you want to say something, we won't allow it. This is how dangerous this is. So I'm urging conservatives to understand this is a worldwide, this is not exaggeration, Tim. This is the greatest worldwide censorship of a woman in the history of man.
By far. And thanks for the wake-up call so that people can really realize what's happening in the world of social media, and it is ugly, as you have chronicled here. Our guest, Brent Bozell, author of Unmasked, Big Media's War Against Trump. Go and get it and read it if you want to know the truth, the facts of the matter. Thank you, my friend, Mr. Bozell.
Thank you, Tim. Great pleasure.
Stay right there. We're coming back with Talkin' Liberty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now we welcome you to the portion of Liberty Nation Radio, which we entitle Talkin' Liberty, as we welcome back in our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, and LibertyNation.com legal affairs correspondent and editor and chief and big kahuna and all things legal at LibertyNation.com, Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Tim. How are you? I'm
good. Is that enough of a flourish for you?
It was just the right amount for me.
Just the right amount. Yeah. Just the right.
Yeah.
I should have known you would say that. The Philadelphia District Attorney, of all people, is arguing that the Pennsylvania death penalty is unconstitutional. Why is it significant that one DA in one state arguing against the death penalty? Why is that important?
Philadelphia had for a long, long time, a better part of it, more than a decade, a DA called Lynn Abraham, who was famous for seeking the death penalty in every possible case that it could be applied. She was profiled nationally as killer DA and stuff like that. And of course, the problem there is, as you might imagine, the death penalty should only be pursued under certain circumstances, particularly heinous ones, and so on and so forth. Well, they now have the metaphysical opposite of that with this DA called Larry Krasner. And he is the DA that Kamala Harris wishes she was to compete in the current primary election. He is a progressive woke DA. He does not prosecute low-level drug crimes against people. And they've done a significant study that talks about 72% of the 155 death sentences that were secured by the office from 78 to 2017 were overturned, and more than half of them for ineffective legal assistance, which means the lawyers didn't do it.
That's a rather damning indictment.
It is. And every other study basically says that blacks don't get as fair a shake when it comes to the death penalty as whites do, as defendants.
I would argue with your characterization of him as being woke. I mean, you don't have to be a social justice warrior to believe that the death penalty is unconstitutional. A lot of people like yourself, I love you, Scott, but you're not woke.
Right.
You have argued consistently against the death penalty.
I think that's sort of the the path, though, that the box that he's being put in by the people who put those people in boxes. You understand? So that's why I kind of couch it that way. But his progressivism, if we want to call it that, Tim, does track very closely with a libertarian mindset. Now, I don't think that he would embrace that label, but in the areas where I see him
not running as a Democrat, he wouldn't. No.
Right. Well, he is the DA now. He's the incumbent, and I don't see him being ousted for this kind of behavior.
Now, you mentioned the emoluments clause, something that's rarely, if ever, been cited. It involves a supposed sort of conflict of interest between the business interests of a sitting president, which Donald Trump certainly has, and his position as president. What do we hear this week about the emoluments clause, and is this anything that can accurately be applied to Donald Trump?
Tim, nobody ever heard of the emoluments clause till 2 years ago. I have a degree in political science, American national government, study the Constitution more hours. It's like what? What is that? What does it do? Yeah, this was simply an attempt, and a valiant one at that, of a full court press attack against Donald Trump, and anything we can do to unseat him, to weaken him, to damage him, and that's what this is about. The emoluments clause has to do with enriching the president, basically using foreign governments to feather their own nest, if you will.
Right.
And because Donald Trump owns hotels that foreign governments sometimes book travel at, the rabid opponents, the rabid political opponents of Donald Trump, who exist in attorneys general's offices and other high positions, used the people's money to sue him and try to say that with either he should have to return the money or some other penalty. In the court here, the Fourth Circuit, U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, has ruled unanimously that the parties didn't even have standing to sue on the issue. So this is now a non-issue for Donald Trump, at least for the time being.
Well, it started on election night when the left said, well, Donald Trump as the president is going to have to give up all of his business interests. Is he prepared to do that? Because if he doesn't, he could violate the emoluments clause. Somebody did some quick research on election night and figured out what the first strategy of the several that they've used to go after him. On the subject of police misconduct, there was a horrifying incident in Mesa, Arizona in 2016 when an Arizona cop basically executed an unarmed man who was innocent of any wrongdoing. And he was dismissed from the force. His colleague, Joe Schaefer of LibertyNation.com, wrote about this. His partner left the country, the partner of the guy who did the shooting. But this guy, the other cop, has now been brought on and given additional days of service so he can qualify for a $30,000 a year pension. If this is not a miscarriage of justice, I don't know what is.
This is the kind of behavior, Tim, that I think that so many of us who are active in the liberty movement is just, it's absolutely maddening. Philip Brailsford is the man, and Mesa, Arizona is the city and their government. And he gunned down this was like a drunk, scared kid. Somebody at a hotel had misidentified an air rifle or BB gun for a real rifle or gun, and basically they sent the SWAT team in, and they overreacted, and they murdered this kid. Daniel Schaefer was his name, and Philip Brailsford got this crazy sweetheart deal where he's allowed to re-enter government service for the purpose of then retiring to get a full pension benefit. It's just staggering that, for every other person of Mesa, Arizona who has to get up and go to work each day, they're going to have to pay for Philip Brailsford to sit on a beach somewhere and dip his toes in the sand after just committing a heinous crime.
I think the outrage on this is palpable on all sides of the political aisle. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, where past is prologue. all available to you on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week, same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying, stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.